My name is Marta Gutierrez. I work for the EGI Foundation. I've been involved in data spaces activities in one way or another. So let me take you through this little intro to data spaces. And Oystein, you are welcome to hit the bingo, yeah, when I reach the limits. I'm gonna just want to talk about a little bit of the context of how data spaces emerge, yeah, and I will talk a little bit about yeah, what's happening in Europe. I would try to throw you after. Probably if you're talking 5 minutes about data spaces, you will want to know what is a data space indeed and what are the cooking ingredients that you need in order to work towards one of them. And I will introduce a little bit as well what's within those cooking ingredients, like the initiatives, the supporting initiatives in Europe in order to build they call them building blocks in order to build data spaces. And I will finalize with 2 examples so you don't think this is all an abstraction level, including EOSC. So I'm going to take you back to year 2020. It is important to understand the context in which all of these activities initiate, right? And in 2020, the Commission launched what they call the European Strategy for Data. It was, yeah, this document, you can read it. In order to fully understand, you need quite a few of the talks from the commissioners to know what they mean by all of these kind of very high level documents. It was an attempt for Europe to create what they call the single market for data, where the data flows across sectors and across borders. Yeah, the free flow of data doesn't mean free of economic value. It means that data is not stuck in silos. The contextual the information for this, it was like back at the time, data was not only being produced by all these big research infrastructures or big companies. Data started to emerge from a number of actors, yeah, and that included citizens, that included IoT. There was plenty of SMEs producing data. So all of that data, probably for a big research infrastructure or for the big companies, sharing data was not an issue. They had the infrastructure, they have the cash, they have the money, they have the means of sharing data. But for all the smaller actors, sharing data was a different story. So it was important for them to not only that this data was available. It's important that it's high quality data. It was not only to feed into the data economy itself, but in order for us to have access to public good services, yeah, that they need to be supported, heavily supported by data infrastructures, and they did this according to a set of rules and values that were fully respected. So the Commission learned their lessons with GDPR, yeah, with access to private data. So they wanted to bring this concept of what they call data sovereignty. So that means that there is no such a concept of owning the data. That doesn't exist in the legal documents, but you have rights over the data. So data sovereignty was like to ensure that those that have the rights over the data keep those controls and they understand how the data flows. So they launched a whole set of mechanisms of regulatory in this strategy. They launched the concept of data spaces themselves, and they launched a whole set of European data regulation, in order to facilitate and to increase these data transfers and data flows. So it was all in all about to find the right balance between maximum data reuse, but in doing that with data sovereignty. And you can find the document all of the way in that. So with that, as I mentioned, they launched common European data spaces in a whole bunch of sectors. This included all the sectors of the economy. This is a very famous slide. It's a little bit old now these days. And it brought the sectorial data spaces in verticals. Some examples of that, like the Green Deal, mobility in agriculture, And all of that, it was vertical layers that sat on top of what they call the compute continuum. Yeah, this which it was the infrastructures that you needed to support the access to data itself, and this emerged this span all the way from IoT to cloud compute and to high performance computing. Yeah, so there were elements, yeah, all of this the vertical data space, they were characterized by a set of multi-stakeholders. And as Oystein mentioned, the important elements of it was like the governance. Yeah, how do you set up a set of rules? Yeah, that is understood by all the stakeholders that contribute to a data space. And of course, there were all the technical elements that probably we're more familiar with in the data space on how do we achieve machine actionable data sharing, indeed. So a little bit of an update because between 2020 and 2025, 26 that we are now, yeah, a lot happened in the data world and all the AI started to emerge. Yeah, the machine learning models, the large language models started to emerge, and they realized that in the middle of all, they needed to tackle all this AI activity. That included regulatory actions. So there are elements in there like the AI Act. And for that, they realized that the data strategy needed an update. So this was launched in November 2025, based on 3 pillars. It's again, you need to watch a lot of the commissioners talking about this to understand the context of what's happening. And the pillar number one, it was just that yeah, data flows, cross-border data flows is not enough. We do need to scale up the access to high quality data for AI. And they did precise that. And the data spaces are still there in order to support all of this. But there are new elements that are emerging as well as the so-called data labs. And there is pillar number two. They wanted to simplify the regulatory landscape. Some of the data regulations that emerged out of the data strategy, they were quite complex. Including the existing data regulation that existed at the horizontal level. I have not included that in my talk because it's complex. But what they're doing here in this pillar two is they're taking 4 of the data regulations. They're going to merge them all in one. It's called the Data Act itself in order to simplify all the regulatory landscape around data. And the final is they want to they are welcoming international data flows. Yeah, so when they are always in the data strategy, they are always worried about bringing data according to European values. So they are really indeed encouraging international data flows from those countries that are like Europe, that act in the same way as Europe. So that's an important context as well. We're going back again a few years ago, back to 2022. The Data Spaces Initiatives launch, and they were mostly programs that spanning from Digital Europe work program. Some of them late in the Horizon Europe program as well. And there was this big project. It was the Data Spaces Support Center. It was a huge initiative trying to support all the vertical initiative data spaces that were being launched in there in order to bring together a community, in order to bring together a common understanding of what does it mean to build a data space. And I will present all of these building blocks that they created over the last 4 years in there. So they didn't bring the links only to the data spaces. They brought the links to all the building blocks, implementers, and that may include all the infrastructure, all the cloud initiatives, all these digital twins initiatives, including the AI and the links with the Euro HPC as well. So it was a sportive action mostly. So yeah, I've been 10 minutes talking about the data spaces, so I'll bring the introduction now of what is it, what is really, and the definition itself changed a little bit over the last 4 years. I saw like 3 different definitions, so this is probably not set in stone yet, but here it is. It's an interoperable framework based on a common governance. We've said that already, and principles, standards and practices, and enabling services And what they are enabled, this is something that Oystein mentioned as well, is trusted data transactions, between the participants. So there's plenty of stuff in there. I've put the important bits in orange, and let me take you a little bit through that. More jargon, or whatever you want to call it, but this is they've worked, the Data Space Support Center worked for for the 4 years on trying to harmonize the jargon around data spaces, and there were at least 100 projects or so behind all of behind the creation of these conceptual models. So they talk about these data space participants in here. Those can be consumers, those can be data providers, or it can be the data space governance authority. This is the body, that brings the definitions of what applies in the governance world. We call those definitions a rule book. It's the process making, the decision making processes, and the rules and the functionalities that will be defined in your data space. So data consumers will consume data product as provided by data providers, and those are exchanged between data participants, between data providers and consumers in what they call a data transaction, right? And they realized that in order for a data space to bring value, all of these data transactions, they may be realized through data space use cases. There's plenty of more of all of these diagrams. I haven't put them all. That goes down into the types of services and all on, but I will put the links later on. So a little bit of a picture, so that you are not dumped by big boxes. So let's say if you have, let's say the bit in orange, you have a data space in here. You may have participants that decide to onboard on the data space. They will have to comply to the governance rules and conditions in order to onboard a data space. The data space itself may have a technical blueprint that is comprised of a set of services. I just put here an example of the data catalog because we are all familiar with those kind of things. But there will be a set of services that they call it the data control plane. This picture is a little bit old as well, but they call where the data space operates, they call it the data control plane. And here, the data space, it will be well defined by the framework, by what we say, the governance and the technical framework. But they don't sit on their own. Data space may not sit on its own. It sits in the middle of a data ecosystem, and you have to understand the interactions of those that are onboarded as part of the data space participants and potential external actors outside the data space. So we're talking about sometimes is called the intra for data space interoperability within the data space, and inter to see what are the interactions that you need with those actors that are still part of your data ecosystem but are not part of your data space, if that makes sense to you. And it's important to understand where do you start with this. When we started to I work on these data spaces and in the governance part, and you need to understand what your data, the features, what type of data and what type of features. So you will find here the fair aspects of here, and together with the quality, and you need to understand because the different features will apply to the different types of data, and it may well be that your data space is a combination of all of these types of data, including research, sensitive data, or industrial. So the things like the visibility and findability, there will be very different approaches depending on what type of data that you have in there. So I will not go into explaining all of this in detail for the sake of time, but let's go. Austin asked me to talk about a little bit of the benefits, and what do I get out of the box? And we did consult many of the stakeholders when going through this exercise. And in fact, you have to do this, when you're talking about business models, about how to, the first thing that you need to study is the value proposition, right? The value propositions for all the different types of stakeholders in their different roles, right? Whether that's as data providers or as data consumers. or as intermediaries. So there were plenty of roles in there and plenty of stakeholders like lawyers, policymakers, or including scientists. When we do talk about scientists, for them it is important to get hold of data for research, and it is important that they get track of the publications, right? Because that's what it makes them a scientist, right? And the story is very different, right? Into especially for data providers or well-established, what we call the well-established data initiatives. They were asking like, what's the benefit for me when I join a data space? Many of them, these were some of the answers that we got from some of the people that we interviewed. They were just like, yeah, it's important for us that when we're going to provide access to cross-domain data, you are used as a data provider to serve your user communities. But when this goes, you have to serve other users that they may come in order to solve cross-domain challenges. They will have lots of difficulties in understanding your data. So all of these, the data spaces may help by the adoption of a common understanding of all of these semantics and frameworks. So I will not go into all of this, but it's complex. The benefits are multi-stakeholder benefits. And again, there is a build-up phase. We've seen how within one domain, building all of these initiatives that go all the way from the initiation to the implementation to an operational phase, it can take up to 15 years, right? And we started, this was very common elements of the data spaces. We started off with the definition of business models, of governance elements. And here we need to understand what is the organizational shape that is going to fit your data space. And this may well be depend on the type of technical infrastructure that you have in place, because the organizational structure may not be the same if you have a centralized form or you have a distributed form. And again, your technical infrastructure will depend heavily on the types of data sets that you have to fulfill and the purpose, the quality. So all of these elements, they are all intrinsically linked between themselves in order to go through all the phases of the data space lifecycle. So just going very quickly into business and organizational building blocks. These were proposed by the Data Space Support Center. It gives you a set of building blocks in order to navigate. They have also created what they call a co-creation method. It's a set of questions and answers that will take you from, if I'm here, I'm starting a data set, then these are the questions that you need to ask and resolve. And it will walk you through each one of these boxes. Starting from the business models, what are the elements of sustainability, of value creation, what are the use cases that you need to fulfill, what's the data space offering, whether there are any third-party service providers involved in it. Looking at the governance, yes, it's important to understand what's the organizational form and what are the rules in order to bring your data providers. In the legal aspects, you need to understand what regulatory compliance, and this applies to the horizontal regulatory compliance that goes all across the data, or it may be a domain-specific regulatory compliance, and what is the contractual framework that binds all the data space stakeholders together. And finally, technical, this was plenty of the elements that, for example, we saw in Luke presentation today, that goes all the way from data interoperability, in the definition of your data models, in the definition of the exchange protocols, in understanding provenance and traceability for the data exchange and the data transactions, all the way to the implementation of a trust framework that has elements of understanding the authentication and authorization infrastructure, but it not only applies to that, it applies to the trust framework, it applies to how do you establish trust between all the participants that contribute into the data space, right? And including the definition of access and usage policies. And finally, the data value creation enablers. I'm going a little bit out of time, but I will finish very quickly. Yeah, it has it has the data service and offerings. It has the means of how do you publish the data into the data space, together with the value creation services, and this may be data visualization services, etc., and that are applied to a very domain specific part. So two examples of those. This was the Green Deal data space that I was involved for a couple of years. It's a data space which objectives are to fulfill the Green Deal strategic actions. So, the Green Deal, it's a huge activity. It's a huge initiative in the Commission in order to reach climate neutrality by 2050. So, all this data space, it was encompassing environmental data that applies to research infrastructures all the way to industrial partners. In order to fulfill the strategic actions. And there were two projects. One was the original one to do the preparatory actions, and now they are in the implementation phase. And the second one is the famous EOSC that, again, Oystein was talking about. And this data space is what they call the Common European Data Space for Research and Innovation. And the EOSC world right now is reshuffling itself. They realized that they worked for many, many years into bringing a common understanding of how to contribute to the research world, right? And they are reshuffling themselves. Instead of bringing a big monolithic platform, they have split this into units that they call nodes. So these are not only there are technical and organizational units and governance units in order to contribute into the European Open Science Node. And all of these nodes, they will come on. I'm putting here a link. There are plenty of research infrastructures, bringing themselves together in the shape of a node. And one of them is environmental research infrastructures, to which SciOS is part of. And how do they understand themselves together is by having common understandings on federated services and that comply to a set of interoperability guidelines. And I'm going to leave it there because I'm a little bit out of time. But I hope that gave you a little bit of a flavor into what is a data space, at a very high level.